The Moon's Last Bride. Kasha Winter had always believed she was safe within the village walls, that the stories of wolves taking brides were nothing more than myths. But when she woke with a sigil burned into her skin, the truth became undeniable. The villagers would not look her in the eye. The howling came closer. And then, in the torchlight, he stood golden-eyed, watching her with something like recognition. "You bear my mark," he murmured. "That means you are mine." Chapter 1. The Sigil of Dread. The morning light, usually a welcome warmth on Kasha Winter's face, felt like an accusation. She lay in bed, the rough linen sheets twisted around her legs, a cold dread seeping into her bones. It had started with a dream, a vivid, terrifying dream of a wolf with eyes like molten gold, its howl a symphony of sorrow and possession. She'd woken with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs, the lingering scent of pine, and something wilder, something animal, clinging to the air. It was then she'd felt it. A searing, burning pain on her left shoulder blade, a pain that had no physical cause she could see in the dim light of her small cottage room. Trembling, she'd reached back, her fingers tracing the outline of something. Something raised and hot, like a brand newly pressed onto her skin. Lighting a candle with shaking hands, Kasha angled a small, tarnished mirror, trying to get a glimpse of her shoulder. The flickering light revealed the truth, and a strangled sob escaped her lips. There, imprinted on her skin as if burned there by a supernatural fire, was a sigil, a complex design of interwoven lines and curves, centered around a stylized wolf's head, its jaws open in a silent roar. The Hollowfang's mark. Kasha, at 57, had lived a life of quiet routine in the village of Oakhaven. Her days were filled with the mundane, tending her small garden, bartering for goods at the market, sharing quiet evenings with the few friends she had left. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away 5 years prior, leaving a void in her life that she'd filled with the simple rhythms of her solitary existence. She'd always considered herself practical, grounded, a woman who dealt in facts, not fancies. The old stories, the ones whispered around crackling fires on cold winter nights, about the werewolves of Hollowfang Forest and their ancient claim on human brides, those were just stories, meant to frighten children and keep them close to home. But the mark was undeniable. It throbbed with a dull, persistent heat, a constant reminder of the dream, of the golden-eyed wolf, of the terrifying reality that was now her life. She dressed slowly, her movements stiff with fear. Her usual homespun dress felt alien against her skin, the familiar comfort replaced by a chilling awareness of her own vulnerability. As she brushed her silver-streaked brown hair, her reflection stared back at her, a stranger in her own eyes. The lines etched around her mouth and eyes, the weariness that had settled in her gaze over the years, seemed to deepen, overshadowed by a newfound terror. The village was already bustling with activity when Kasha finally stepped outside. The aroma of baking bread, usually a comforting scent, now felt cloying, suffocating. She tried to walk with her usual briskness, her head held high, but her steps faltered. The villagers, her neighbors, the people she'd known her entire life, they wouldn't meet her gaze. They averted their eyes, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. Some even crossed themselves as she passed, muttering hurried prayers under their breath. Old Maggie, the village herbalist, a woman who had always greeted Kasha with a warm smile and a sprig of rosemary, now stood frozen in her doorway, her wrinkled face pale with a knowing dread. She didn't speak, but her eyes, usually bright and twinkling, were filled with a sorrow that cut Kasha to the core. The whispers started as soon as she turned her back. The Hollowfang's mark, poor Kasha, a bride, claimed it's the curse. The words, though spoken softly, seemed to echo in the air, amplified by her own mounting fear. Kasha reached the market square, the heart of Oakhaven, but the usual lively chatter and bartering had ceased. The vendors, usually eager to display their wares, now seemed preoccupied, their faces turned away. Even Alara, the baker's wife, who had always shared a kind word and a warm loaf with Kasha, now stood silently behind her stall, her eyes downcast, her hands nervously kneading a piece of dough. The silence was broken only by the distant howling of wolves, a sound that had always been a part of the Oakhaven soundscape, a distant reminder of the wildness that lay just beyond their carefully cultivated world. But today, the howling was different. It was closer, louder, more insistent, a chorus of voices that seemed to be calling specifically for her. It was as Kasha was about to turn and flee, to run back to the supposed safety of her cottage, that he appeared. He emerged from the edge of the forest, stepping into the torchlight that illuminated the market square. He was tall, powerfully built, his presence radiating an almost palpable energy. His clothes were dark, the color of the forest shadows, and his hair was long and untamed, the color of raven's wings. But it was his eyes that held Kasha captive. They were the same eyes from her dream, eyes of molten gold, burning with an intensity that seemed to strip away her defenses, her disbelief, her very soul. He moved with a grace that was both predatory and mesmerizing, his gaze fixed on Kasha. The villagers, frozen in place, watched in terrified silence. He stopped a few feet from her, the air between them thick with an unspoken tension, a primal connection that bypassed reason and logic. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, a rumble that seemed to vibrate deep within her chest. "You bear my mark," he murmured, his golden eyes searching her face, lingering on the fear in her eyes, the slight tremble of her lips. "That means you are mine." The words were a pronouncement, a sentence, a claim that shattered the remnants of Kasha's old life. The world she knew, the safety she had clung to, dissolved in that instant. She was no longer Kasha Winter, the quiet widow of Oakhaven. She was something else, something claimed. And the look in his eyes, the strange mixture of possessiveness and recognition, hinted at a destiny far more complex and terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The way he said mine wasn't entirely of ownership. A thread, a thin, shimmering thread of something else was woven in, a connection that was ages old. And it was this thread that terrified her more than anything. What did he recognize? Chapter 2. Whispers in the Village. The silence that followed his pronouncement was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the torches and the frantic beat of Kasha's heart. She wanted to scream, to deny, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot, her voice trapped in her throat. The golden eyes held her captive, their intensity both terrifying and intriguing. There was a depth to them, a hint of ancient sorrow that mirrored something deep within her own soul. He took a step closer, and Kasha instinctively flinched, her hand flying to the mark on her shoulder, as if to shield it from his gaze. He noticed the gesture, and a flicker of something pain, regret, crossed his face, quickly masked by a stoic expression. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice softer now, though still laced with an undercurrent of command. "I will not harm you." His words, meant to be reassuring, only served to heighten her fear. What did he mean by harm? What did he intend to do with her? The stories, the whispers, flooded her mind, tales of women taken into the forest, never to be seen again, their lives sacrificed to appease the ancient, primal power of the werewolves. Who are you?" Kasha finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. He tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I am Kalen, of the Hollowfong Pack. And you, Kasha Winter, are my intended." The word intended hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't a word of love, of courtship, of choice. It was a word of destiny, of obligation, of a bond forged not by affection, but by something far older, far more powerful. Before Kasha could respond, a commotion erupted from the edge of the square. A group of villagers, led by Elder Bran, the village leader, pushed their way to the front, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Kalen," Elder Bran said, his voice strained but firm, "you have no right to be here. Leave this woman be." Kalen turned his gaze to the elder, his golden eyes narrowing. "She bears the mark, Bran. You know the law. She is mine to claim." "The law is outdated, barbaric," Bran retorted, his hand resting on the hilt of a hunting knife strapped to his belt. "We will not allow you to take another one of our women." A tense silence fell over the square. Kasia could feel the eyes of the villagers on her, their fear palpable. She knew they were afraid for her, but she also knew they were afraid of her, of the mark she bore, of the power it represented. Kalen's expression hardened. "The law is the law, Bran, and I will not be denied." He turned back to Kasia, his gaze softening slightly.
"Come, Kasia."
"It is time." He extended his hand towards her, a silent invitation, a command disguised as a choice. Kasia looked at his hand, at the strong, calloused fingers, and then at the faces of the villagers, their expressions a mixture of pleading and resignation. She knew what they expected of her: to resist, to fight, to scream and claw and beg for mercy. But something held her back. It wasn't just fear, though fear was certainly present. It was something else, something deeper, a strange sense of inevitability. The dream, the mark, the golden eyes, it all pointed to a destiny she couldn't comprehend, a path she hadn't chosen, but one she couldn't seem to escape. And then there was the look in Kalen's eyes. It wasn't the look of a monster, of a creature intent on destruction. It was the look of a man burdened by a heavy responsibility, a man carrying the weight of ancient traditions and a sorrow she couldn't yet understand. There was a loneliness there, a deep-seated yearning that resonated with her own quiet solitude. Against her better judgment, against the silent pleas of her neighbors, Kasia took a tentative step forward. She didn't take his hand, not yet, but she moved closer, her gaze locked with his. What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kalen's expression softened further, a hint of relief flickering in his golden eyes. "We go home," he said, his voice low and steady. "To Hollowfang." He turned and began to walk back towards the forest, his movements fluid and confident. Kasia hesitated for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the villagers, their expressions a mixture of shock and despair. Old Maggie, standing in her doorway, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness. With a deep breath, Kasia followed Kalen, leaving behind the only life she had ever known, stepping into the shadows of the forest and into the unknown destiny that awaited her. The whispers of the village faded behind her, replaced by the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, and the ever-present howling of the wolves, a chorus that now seemed to welcome her, to claim her as one of their own. The torches of the village became small, flickering embers. Then even those were gone. She felt a hand slip into hers, surprisingly warm, surprisingly gentle. She didn't pull away. Chapter 3. The Golden-Eyed Wolf. The forest enveloped them in a cloak of darkness, the towering trees blotting out the last vestiges of the moon's pale light. Kasia stumbled, her eyes struggling to adjust to the sudden gloom. Kalen's grip on her hand tightened, his presence a reassuring anchor in the overwhelming darkness. He didn't speak, but his silence wasn't the menacing silence of a captor, it was the quiet companionship of someone who understood the weight of the moment. As they walked, Kasia's senses heightened, her body on high alert. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled her nostrils, mingled with the musky, unfamiliar scent of Kalen himself, a scent that was both wild and strangely comforting. The sounds of the forest, once distant and muted, now surrounded her, a cacophony of rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the distant calls of unseen creatures. She stole glances at Kalen, trying to decipher the enigma that he was. His profile was sharp and defined, his jaw set with a determined purpose. His long, dark hair flowed freely down his back, occasionally catching on the branches that brushed against them. He moved with an effortless grace, his body perfectly attuned to the uneven terrain, a creature of the forest as much as the wolves themselves. How did this happen?" Kasia finally asked, her voice a hushed whisper in the stillness of the woods. "The mark, how did it get there?" Kalen didn't slow his pace, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "It is the way of the Hollowfang," he said, his voice low and measured. "A connection is formed, a bond a claiming. But I don't understand, Kasia persisted. I've never even seen a werewolf before tonight. He glanced at her then, his golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. It is not always a matter of sight, Kasia. It is a matter of resonance. Of souls recognizing one another across the veil. His words were cryptic, mystical, and yet they resonated with something deep within her. The dream, the feeling of familiarity, the strange pull she felt towards him, it all hinted at a connection that transcended the logical, the rational. So, you're saying we were destined to meet? She asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. He stopped then, turning to face her fully. The darkness seemed to press in around them, the only light source the faint glow of his golden eyes. Destiny is a strong word, he said, his voice soft but firm. But yes, I believe we were. The mark is not given lightly, Kasia. It is a sign of a bond that has been foretold, a connection that cannot be broken. But what if I don't want this bond? Kasia challenged, her voice gaining strength. What if I refuse to accept it? His expression didn't change, but she sensed a flicker of sadness in his eyes. You cannot refuse it, Kasia. It is already done. The mark is a part of you now, just as you are a part of us. Us? She questioned, her heart pounding in her chest. You mean the werewolves? He nodded. The Holophone pack. My pack. And now yours. The thought of becoming a part of a werewolf pack, of leaving behind her human life entirely, was terrifying. But as she looked into Kaelin's eyes, she saw something more than just the predator, the monster. She saw a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of loneliness that mirrored her own. She saw a man burdened by a responsibility he hadn't chosen, a man bound by ancient laws and traditions. Tell me about your pack, she said, her voice softer now, her curiosity piqued. Tell me about Holophone. A faint smile touched his lips. It is a place of ancient power, he said, his voice taking on a storytelling quality. A place where the veil between the human world and the spirit world is thin. A place where the wolves run free, where the old ways are honored, where the bonds of family and loyalty are stronger than any chains. He began to walk again, and Kasia followed, her fear gradually giving way to a strange sense of fascination. He spoke of the history of the Holophone pack, of their ancient origins, of their struggles to survive in a world that feared and hunted them. He spoke of their connection to the forest, of their reverence for the natural world, of their deep-seated sense of community. He also spoke, hesitantly, of the curse that bound them to the human world, the curse that demanded a human bride be taken every generation to ensure the continuation of their line. He didn't shy away from the brutality of it, the unfairness of it, but he also spoke of the responsibility he felt, the duty to his pack, to his ancestors. As they walked, Kasia began to see Kaelin not just as a werewolf, a creature of myth and legend, but as a man, a complex and conflicted individual, caught between his own desires and the weight of his heritage. The golden eyes, once a source of terror, now seemed to hold a glimmer of hope, a promise of something more. The forest, once a place of fear, now felt strangely welcoming, a sanctuary from the judgments and whispers of the village. She felt him watching her, his gaze a warm weight. He was giving her time, a chance to adapt. It was more than she'd expected. It was kind. A twig snapped behind them. Kaelin's entire body went rigid, and he pushed her behind him, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Chapter 4. A bride claimed. The growl that emanated from Kaelin was unlike anything Kasia had ever heard. It was primal, visceral, a sound that vibrated deep within her bones and sent shivers down her spine. He stood between her and the perceived threat, a wall of muscle and barely contained fury, his golden eyes blazing in the darkness. The snapping of twigs grew closer, and Kasia could hear the rustling of leaves, the heavy panting of something. She peered around Kaelin's broad shoulder, her heart hammering against her ribs, trying to make out the source of the disturbance. Then, two figures emerged from the shadows, their forms shifting and indistinct in the dim light. As they drew closer, Kasia gasped. They were werewolves, but not like Kaelin. These were larger, more feral, their eyes glowing with a savage, predatory hunger. Their fur was matted and coarse, their teeth bared in menacing snarls. "Kalen," one of the werewolves growled, his voice a guttural rasp. "You have taken what is not yours." Kalen's growl deepened, his body tensing further. "She bears the mark, Ryland. She is mine by right." "The mark is a lie," the other werewolf, a female with a scarred muzzle, snarled. "A trick to steal our brides, to weaken our bloodline." "Seraphina," Kalen said, his voice laced with warning. "Do not test my patience." The tension in the air was thick, palpable, a silent battle of wills between the three werewolves. Kasia felt a surge of fear, but also a strange sense of protection. Kalen stood between her and the other werewolves, his body a shield, his presence a reassurance. "We will not let you take her, Kalen," Ryland growled, taking a step forward. "She is human. She belongs with her own kind." "She is chosen," Kalen retorted, his voice unwavering. "And I will defend her with my life." The two werewolves circled, their movements fluid and predatory, their eyes locked on Kalen. Kasia knew that a fight was inevitable, a brutal clash of claws and teeth. She wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, but she knew her words would be meaningless. This was a conflict that went beyond her, a battle for dominance, for tradition, for the very survival of their pack. Suddenly, Ryland lunged, his massive form hurtling towards Kalen. Kalen met the attack head-on, his own body transforming, shifting, growing. Fur sprouted from his skin, his bones cracked and reformed, his teeth elongated into sharp fangs. In a matter of seconds, the man she had been walking with was gone, replaced by a magnificent wolf, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes burning with a golden fire. The two werewolves clashed, a whirlwind of fur and claws and teeth. The forest echoed with their snarls and growls, the sounds of their struggle a terrifying symphony of violence. Kasia watched in horror, her body frozen in place, her mind reeling from the sheer savagery of the scene. Seraphina, seeing an opportunity, lunged towards Kasia, her eyes filled with a predatory glee. But Kalen, even in the midst of his battle with Ryland, anticipated her move. He intercepted her with a lightning-fast strike, his powerful jaws clamping down on her shoulder, throwing her back into the trees. The fight continued, a brutal dance of death and survival. Kalen, despite being outnumbered, fought with a ferocity and skill that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. He was protecting her, defending his claim, his bride. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kalen gained the upper hand. He pinned Ryland to the ground, his fangs bared at the other wolf's throat. Ryland, defeated and bleeding, whimpered in submission. Kalen released him, his golden eyes still blazing with anger. "Leave," he growled, his voice a low rumble. "And do not return." Ryland and Seraphina, their bodies bruised and battered, retreated into the shadows, their tails tucked between their legs. Kalen watched them go, his body still tense, his senses on high alert. Then he turned back to Kasia, his transformation reversing, his human form gradually returning. He stood before her, naked and vulnerable, his body covered in scratches and bruises, but his eyes were filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Kasia nodded, her voice still caught in her throat. She was shaken, terrified, but also amazed. She had witnessed something incredible, something that defied logic and reason. She had seen the true nature of the werewolves, their power, their savagery, but also their loyalty, their protectiveness. Kalen reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "I told you I would protect you," he said, his voice soft. Kasia looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man, a warrior, a protector. And she saw something else, something that sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. She saw desire. He leaned in, his breath warm on her face, and for a moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. But then he hesitated, his gaze searching her face, questioning, unsure. "I should get you to Holofong," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's not safe here. He turned and began to walk again, leading her deeper into the forest. Kasia followed, her mind racing, her heart pounding. She was a bride claimed, a woman taken from her world and thrust into a world of magic and danger. But she was also something more. She was a woman on the verge of discovering a truth about herself, about the world, and about the golden-eyed wolf who had claimed her as his own. She felt, more than saw him look back. His hand found hers. Their fingers intertwined. The fight had shifted something, hadn't it? Chapter 5. Into the Howling Woods. The remainder of their journey through the woods was conducted in a silence that was charged with unspoken emotions. Kasia's mind reeled from the violent encounter she had witnessed, the raw power and ferocity of the werewolves still vivid in her memory. Yet, alongside the fear, a strange sense of calm began to settle within her. Kalen's presence, his unwavering protection, had instilled a newfound sense of security, a trust that defied the circumstances of her abduction. He walked slightly ahead of her, his senses alert to any potential danger, his hand still clasped firmly in hers. The forest, once menacing and unfamiliar, now seemed to hold a strange beauty. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor, creating an ethereal, almost magical atmosphere. Kasia found herself studying Kalen's back, the way his muscles moved beneath his skin, the way his dark hair swayed with each step. She noticed the small details, the way he held his head, the slight limp in his gait from the fight, the way he instinctively scanned the surroundings, ever vigilant. He was a creature of the wild, yet there was a gentleness to him, a vulnerability that she had glimpsed beneath the surface of his stoic exterior. As they walked, she began to notice the subtle changes in the landscape. The trees grew taller, their branches more intertwined, the air grew colder, and a faint mist began to swirl around them, clinging to their clothes and skin. The howling of wolves, once distant and sporadic, now grew closer, more frequent, a chorus of voices that seemed to resonate with the very air they breathed. "We're almost there," Kalen said, his voice breaking the silence. He didn't turn to look at her, but she could sense a change in his demeanor, a hint of nervousness. "What is it like?" Kasia asked, her voice soft. "Halofong, what will it be like for me?" He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "It is different," he said finally, "from anything you've ever known. It is a place of ancient traditions, of strong bonds, of magic." "Magic?" Kasia questioned, her eyebrows raising. He glanced at her over his shoulder, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yes, magic. The kind that flows through the earth, through the trees, through us. You will feel it, Kasia. You are already feeling it." She considered his words, her mind struggling to reconcile the rational world she had always known with the supernatural reality she was now facing. She thought of the mark on her shoulder, the way it throbbed with a subtle energy, the way it seemed to connect her to Kalen, to the forest, to something greater. "Will they accept me?" she asked, her voice filled with a sudden wave of apprehension. Kalen stopped and turned to face her, his golden eyes searching her face. "They will have to," he said, his voice firm. "You are my intended. You bear the mark. That is all that matters." But Kasia could sense the uncertainty beneath his confident words. She knew that her arrival would not be welcomed by all, that the ancient laws and traditions of the Halofong pack would be tested by her presence. She was an outsider, a human, a disruption to their carefully ordered world. They continued their journey, the mist growing thicker, the howling of wolves growing louder. Finally, they emerged from the dense trees into a clearing, and Kasia gasped. Before her lay Halofong, a hidden valley nestled deep within the heart of the forest. It was a breathtaking sight, a scene of wild, untamed beauty. A waterfall cascaded down a sheer cliff face, feeding a crystal-clear river that snaked through the valley floor. Scattered throughout the clearing were dwellings, not houses, as Kasia knew them, but structures built from natural materials, seamlessly integrated into the landscape. Some were built into the sides of the cliffs, others nestled amongst the trees, their roofs covered in moss and vines. Smoke curled from chimneys, carrying the scent of wood smoke and roasted meat, a strangely comforting aroma in this wild, unfamiliar place. Figures moved through the clearing, some human, some in their wolf forms, their movements fluid and graceful. Children played near the riverbank, their laughter echoing through the valley, a sound that was both familiar and strangely alien. Kaelin led her towards the largest dwelling, a structure built into the base of the cliff, its entrance framed by towering stone pillars carved with intricate designs of wolves and other mythical creatures. As they approached, the figures in the clearing stopped what they were doing, turning to stare at Kasia, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and hostility. Kasia felt a wave of fear wash over her, her body tensing, her hand instinctively clutching Kaelin's. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, his presence a source of strength in this overwhelming moment. "Do not be afraid," he whispered, his voice low and steady. "I am here." He led her towards the entrance of the dwelling, his head held high, his gaze unwavering. As they stepped inside, Kasia felt a shift in the air, a palpable sense of ancient power, of magic, of a world beyond her comprehension. She was no longer in Oakhaven. She was in Hollowfong, the home of the werewolves, the place where her destiny awaited. She felt eyes on her as they entered a great hall, a vast cavern illuminated by flickering torches. Several figures were seated around a massive stone table, all turning toward them, all watching. The scrutiny felt like a physical weight.
What now?
Chapter 6. The Pax shadowed Denver. The great hall of Hollowfong was a spectacle of raw, untamed beauty. The walls were the natural rock of the cave, smoothed and polished by centuries of wind and water, adorned with intricate carvings that depicted scenes of wolves hunting, playing, and transforming. Torches flickered in sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to bring the carvings to life. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, pine, and the underlying, musky aroma of wolf. The massive stone table that dominated the center of the hall was surrounded by figures, their faces a mixture of ages and expressions. Some were old, their faces etched with the wisdom and weariness of long lives, their eyes gleaming with ancient knowledge. Others were younger, their bodies lean and muscular, their gazes sharp and intense. All of them, however, shared the same striking feature: eyes that glowed with an inner light, eyes that marked them as werewolves. Kaelin led Kasia towards the table, his hand still firmly clasped in hers. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the crackling of the torches and the muffled sound of their footsteps on the stone floor. Kasia could feel the weight of their gazes upon her, scrutinizing, judging, questioning. At the head of the table sat an elderly woman, her silver hair braided and adorned with feathers, her face a tapestry of wrinkles and wisdom. Her eyes, though faded with age, still held a spark of power, a depth of knowledge that commanded respect. This, Kasia knew, must be the elder of the Hollowfong pack. "Kaelin," the elder said, her voice raspy but firm. "You have returned. And you have brought her." Her gaze shifted to Kasia, her eyes narrowing slightly, assessing, probing. Kasia felt a shiver run down her spine, her body tensing under the elder's scrutiny. "Elder Lyra," Kaelin said, his voice respectful but firm. "This is Kasia Winter. She bears the mark. She is my intended." A murmur rippled through the assembled werewolves, their expressions shifting from curiosity to suspicion, to outright hostility. Kasia could feel their resentment, their distrust, their fear of the outsider who had been brought into their midst. The mark, a young werewolf with fiery red hair, sneered. "A human. She is not one of us." "She is chosen, Rorik," Kaelin retorted, his voice laced with warning. "The mark does not lie. The mark can be manipulated," another werewolf, a woman with a scarred face, countered. "We have seen it before. The humans have tried to trick us, to steal our power." "Enough," Elder Lyra said, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "We will discuss this. But first, Kaelin, you will explain. How did this happen?" Kalen recounted the events of the past few days, his voice steady and unwavering. He spoke of the dream, of the mark appearing on Kasha's skin, of his encounter with her in the village, of the challenge from Ryland and Serafina. He didn't shy away from the details, the violence, the resistance he had faced. As he spoke, Kasha studied the faces of the assembled werewolves, trying to gauge their reactions. Some seemed skeptical, others hostile, but a few seemed to hold a flicker of understanding. Elder Lyra listened intently, her gaze shifting between Kalen and Kasha. When Kalen finished speaking, she remained silent for a long moment, her eyes closed, as if in deep contemplation. Finally, she opened her eyes, her gaze settling on Kasha. "You," she said, her voice addressing Kasha directly for the first time. "What do you say? Do you accept this bond?" Kasha felt a surge of panic, her mind racing. She was trapped, surrounded by werewolves, her fate hanging in the balance. She could deny it, she could fight, but she knew it would be futile. The mark, the dream, the connection she felt with Kalen, it all pointed to a destiny she couldn't escape. She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting Elder Lyra's. I don't understand it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I feel it. The connection. The pull." A murmur of surprise rippled through the hall. Kasha's honesty, her vulnerability, seemed to disarm some of the werewolves, their hostility softening slightly. Elder Lyra nodded slowly. "The mark speaks," she said, her voice softer now. "But the heart must also choose. You have been taken from your world, Kasha Winter. You have been thrust into a life you did not choose. But you are here now, and you have a choice to make." What choice?" Kasha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can embrace this new life," Elder Lyra said. "You can learn our ways, accept our traditions, become one of us. Or you can resist. You can fight against the bond, against your destiny. But know this, Kasha Winter, the path of resistance is a difficult one. It will be filled with pain, with sorrow, with loss." Kasha looked at Kalen, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She saw the burden he carried, the responsibility he felt, the loneliness he had endured. And she saw something else, something that resonated with her own heart. She saw love, a love that was forbidden, a love that was dangerous, but a love that was undeniably real. She took a deep breath, her decision made. "I will try," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I will try to understand. I will try to belong." A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the hall. The tension eased, the hostility softened, replaced by a cautious acceptance. Elder Lyra nodded.
"So, be it," she said.
"You will be tested, Kasha Winter. You will be challenged. But you will also be protected.
You are now a part of Holofong.
You are one of us." She looked across the table, meeting eyes with a woman who had so far been silent. "Maeva, you will guide her." The silence that followed was more intense, more charged. Something had just happened that Kasha didn't understand. The woman who had been called Maeva had paled considerably. She was staring at Kalen, and he at her, and there was pain there. Deep, searing pain. Chapter 7. Echoes of a Lost Love. The name Maeva seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, a ripple of tension spreading through the assembled werewolves. Kasha watched as the woman identified as Maeva rose from her seat, her movements stiff and reluctant. She was beautiful, with long, flowing black hair and eyes that were a deep, haunting shade of violet. But her beauty was marred by a profound sadness, a weariness that seemed to cling to her like a shroud. The exchange of glances between Maeva and Kalen was brief, but intense, a silent conversation filled with unspoken emotions, pain, regret, and a lingering sense of loss. Kasha felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify: jealousy? Empathy? As she witnessed the connection between them, a connection that clearly predated her arrival. "Elder Lyra," Maeva said, her voice low and strained. "Surely, there is someone else. You are the most qualified." "Maeva," Elder Lyra said, her voice firm but gentle. "You know our ways, our traditions, better than anyone. And you understand the burden of the mark. Maeva's eyes flickered with pain at the elder's words, her gaze dropping to the floor. She remained silent for a moment, her body trembling slightly, before finally nodding in acquiescence. "As you wish, elder," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kalen stepped forward, his expression softening as he looked at Maeva. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "I know this is not easy for you." Maeva met his gaze, her violet eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "It is my duty," she said, her voice flat. "To the pack. To you." The unspoken words hung between them, a reminder of a past they couldn't escape, a love that had been lost, a bond that had been broken. Kasha felt a sudden wave of sympathy for Maeva, understanding, in that moment, the depth of her sacrifice. Elder Lyra gestured for Kasha to follow Maeva. "Go with her," she said, her voice softer now. "She will show you to your quarters. And she will teach you what you need to know." Kasha hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on Kalen. He gave her a reassuring nod, a silent promise of support. "I will be here," he said, his voice low and steady. Kasha took a deep breath and followed Maeva out of the great hall, leaving behind the scrutiny of the assembled werewolves and the lingering tension of the unspoken past. Maeva led her through a series of winding corridors, carved into the rock of the cave, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the sound of their footsteps and the distant echoes of the waterfall. Finally, they reached a small chamber, carved into the side of the cliff, its entrance covered by a heavy curtain of woven vines. Maeva pushed the curtain aside, revealing a surprisingly cozy space. A fire burned brightly in a small hearth, casting a warm glow on the stone walls. A bed of furs lay in one corner, and a few simple furnishings, a wooden chest, a stool, a small table completed the room. "This will be your home," Maeva said, her voice devoid of emotion.
"For now."
Kasha stepped inside, her eyes taking in the details of the chamber. It was simple, rustic, but it held a strange sense of comfort. It was a sanctuary, a place of refuge from the overwhelming strangeness of Holofong. "Thank you," Kasha said, her voice sincere. Maeva nodded curtly, her gaze avoiding Kasha's. "I will return in the morning," she said, "to begin your instruction." She turned to leave, but Kasha stopped her. "Maeva," she said, her voice soft. "I know this is difficult for you. I know there is history between you and Kalen." Maeva's body stiffened, her back to Kasha. She remained silent for a long moment, her shoulders trembling slightly. "There is nothing between us," she said finally, her voice strained. "Not anymore. He is bound to you now. By the mark. By the law." "But you loved him," Kasha said, her voice filled with empathy. Maeva turned to face her, her violet eyes flashing with anger, with pain. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford," she said, her voice bitter. "Not in Holofong. Not with the curse hanging over us." "The curse?" Kasha questioned, her eyebrows raising. Maeva's expression softened slightly, her anger giving way to a profound sadness. "The curse that binds us to the human world," she said. "The curse that demands a human bride every generation. The curse that took him from me." She turned and walked away, leaving Kasha alone in the chamber, the weight of her words heavy in the air. Kasha sank onto the bed of furs, her mind racing. She had learned more about the curse, about the sacrifice that Maeva had made, about the complex web of relationships and obligations that bound the Holofong pack. And she had learned something about herself, about her own capacity for empathy, for understanding, for love. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls, the only sound in the otherwise silent chamber. She looked down at her arm, tracing the outline of the Holofong mark. It throbbed, faintly. She was starting to realize that curse was a simplification. The reality was a tapestry of old magic and older choices. And she was a thread, newly woven in. Chapter 8. The Curse of Holofong. The next morning, Kasha awoke to the sound of soft knocking on the curtain that served as her door. She sat up, her body stiff and sore from sleeping on the unfamiliar bed of furs, her mind still reeling from the revelations of the previous night. Maeva entered the chamber, her expression stoic, her violet eyes devoid of emotion. She carried a tray laden with food, a bowl of steaming porridge, a plate of dried meat, and a cup of herbal tea. "Eat," Maeva said, her voice curt. "You will need your strength." Kasha obeyed, her appetite surprisingly strong despite her apprehension. The food was simple but nourishing, and the tea, though bitter, warmed her from the inside out. As she ate, Maeva began her instruction. She spoke of the history of the Holophong pack, of their ancient origins, of their connection to the forest, of their reverence for the natural world. She explained their customs, their traditions, their laws, the intricate web of rules and obligations that govern their lives. She spoke of the werewolf's ability to shift, to transform between human and wolf form, a power that was both a gift and a burden. She explained the hierarchy of the pack, the role of the elder, the responsibilities of each member, the importance of loyalty and obedience. And then she spoke of the curse. "It began centuries ago," Maeva said, her voice low and filled with a haunting sadness. "A war between our pack and a powerful sorceress. We were victorious, but not without cost. She cursed us, binding us to the human world, decreeing that every generation, a human bride must be taken to ensure the continuation of our line."
"But why?"
Kasha asked, her voice filled with confusion. "Why a human bride?" "The sorceress believed that our power came from our connection to the wild," Maeva explained. "By forcing us to mate with humans, she sought to weaken our bloodline, to dilute our magic, to make us less." "And has it worked?" Kasha questioned. Maeva's expression hardened. "We have survived," she said. "We have adapted. But the curse has taken its toll. It has caused pain, sorrow, division. It has forced us to make difficult choices, to sacrifice our own happiness for the sake of the pack." She spoke of the previous brides, the women who had been taken from their homes, their lives, their families. Some had embraced their new lives, finding love and acceptance within the pack. Others had resisted, their spirits broken, their lives ending in tragedy. "You are different, Kasha," Maeva said, her gaze meeting Kasha's. "You are older, stronger, more resilient. You have a choice. You can embrace this destiny, or you can fight against it. But know this: the curse is powerful. It will not be easily broken." "And Kalen?" Kasha asked, her voice soft. "What about him? Does he love me?" Maeva's expression flickered with pain, her gaze dropping to the floor. "He is bound to you," she said, her voice strained. "By the mark. By the law. But love is a complex thing. It takes time. Trust. Understanding." She then showed the practical aspects of being part of the pack. How to tend the small herb garden in the courtyard. How the hunting parties divided the spoils. How disputes were settled. It was a structured, self-contained society and utterly alien to Kasha. "He chose you, Kasha," Maeva said after a moment of silence and demonstration, her voice gaining a hint of warmth. "He could feel your strength, that flicker of wildness that all marked ones possess. It's not love, not yet, but it's kinship, a recognition." "And you?" Kasha asked, her voice hesitant. "Do you hate me?" Maeva looked at her, her violet eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "I do not hate you, Kasha," she said, her voice sincere. "I envy you. You have what I lost. But I also see your strength, your courage, your kindness. And I know that Kayla needs you." She paused, her gaze searching Kasha's face. "The curse has taken much from us," she said. "But it has also given us something. It has taught us the value of resilience, of adaptation, of hope. And you, Kasha Winter, you are hope. You are the key to breaking the curse, to freeing us from this endless cycle of pain and sacrifice." Maeva's hands clenched. "We believe, the elders and I, and Kalen does too, that the wording of the curse, it has a loophole, a way out. But it requires a choice. A true choice, made freely by the marked bride." Kasha listened, captivated by this glimpse into the complex world, the heartbreaking reality that now defined her existence. The curse wasn't just about taking brides, it was about choice, about breaking a cycle. She looked at Maeva, really looked at her, and saw not just a rival, but a potential ally. A friend, even. "Tell me," Kasia said, her voice firm. "Tell me everything." As Maeva began to explain the intricacies of the ancient wording, a distant howl echoed through the valley. Maeva's head snapped up. Her face had gone pale. Chapter 9. A Glimmer of Trust. The howl that echoed through the valley was unlike any Kasia had heard before. It was sharp, urgent, a sound filled with warning and fear. Maeva's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her body tensed, her eyes widened, and a look of dread washed over her face. "What is it?" Kasia asked, her voice filled with apprehension. "What's wrong?" Maeva didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the chamber, as if listening for something beyond Kasia's range of hearing. The howling continued, growing closer, more insistent, accompanied by the sounds of frantic movement and shouted commands from outside. "It's Ryland," Maeva said finally, her voice strained. "He's returned. And he's not alone." Kasia's heart pounded in her chest. She remembered Ryland, the aggressive werewolf who had challenged Kaelin in the forest, his eyes filled with hatred and resentment. The thought of facing him again, of facing an entire pack of hostile werewolves, filled her with terror. What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Maeva's expression hardened, her fear replaced by a determined resolve. "We stay here," she said. "This chamber is protected. They cannot enter without permission." "But Kaelin," Kasia said, her voice filled with concern. "Where is he?" "He will be with the others," Maeva said. "Defending the pack. Defending you." The howling grew louder, closer, accompanied by the sounds of a struggle, the clash of claws and teeth, the snarls and growls of werewolves locked in combat. Kasia could feel the vibrations through the stone floor, the very air seeming to tremble with the force of the battle. She paced the small chamber, her mind racing, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and anger. She was tired of being afraid, of being a pawn in this ancient conflict, of being treated as a prize to be fought over. She wanted to understand, to help, to fight. "Maeva," she said, her voice firm. "Tell me about this loophole. The one in the curse. What is it?" Maeva hesitated, her gaze searching Kasia's face. She seemed to be weighing her options, assessing Kasia's resolve, her trustworthiness. "The curse states that a human bride must be taken," Maeva said finally, her voice low and hesitant. "But it does not specify how. It does not say that the bride must be taken against her will. It does not say that she must be unwilling." Kasia's eyes widened, her mind grasping the implications of Maeva's words. "So, if I choose to stay," she said, her voice filled with a newfound understanding. "If I willingly accept the bond, the curse, it could be broken?" Maeva nodded. "That is what we believe," she said. "But it must be a true choice, Kasia. A choice made freely, without coercion, without fear. A choice made from the heart." "And if I choose wrongly?" Kasia asked, her voice trembling. Maeva's expression softened, her eyes filled with empathy. "Then the cycle continues," she said. "Another bride will be taken. Another generation will suffer. The curse will remain." The weight of the decision pressed down on Kasia, the responsibility for the fate of the Hallowfang pack, for Kaelin, for Maeva, for herself, resting squarely on her shoulders. She looked around the small chamber, at the fire burning in the hearth, at the bed of furs, at the simple furnishings. This was her home now, this strange, wild, dangerous place. These were her people, these werewolves, bound by ancient laws and traditions, struggling to survive in a world that feared and hunted them. And Kaelin, he was her intended, her protector, her lover. She didn't know what the future held, what their relationship would become, but she knew that she felt a connection to him, a bond that transcended the mark, the curse, the circumstances of their meeting. She thought of the village, of her old life, of the quiet routine she had left behind. It seemed a lifetime ago, a distant memory, a world she no longer belonged to. She had been taken, abducted, thrust into this new reality, but she had also been chosen. Chosen by Kaelin, chosen by the mark, chosen by destiny. The sounds of the battle outside grew louder, more intense, a reminder of the immediate danger, of the choices she had to make. She looked at Maeva, her eyes filled with determination.
I need to see him, she said, her voice firm.
I need to see Kaelin. Maeva's expression flickered with surprise, with respect.
It is dangerous, she said.
Ryland and his pack, they will not hesitate to harm you.
I don't care, Kasha said.
I need to see him. I need to tell him. Maeva studied her for a long moment, her violet eyes searching Kasha's soul. Then, she nodded slowly.
Come, she said.
But stay close. And be careful. Maeva led her out of the chamber, through the winding corridors, towards the sounds of the battle. As they neared the great hall, the sounds grew deafening, the air thick with the scent of blood and fear. Kasha felt a surge of adrenaline, her body tensing, preparing for whatever lay ahead. She had made her choice. She would face the danger, face the werewolves, face her destiny. And she would do it willingly. Maeva stopped her before the entrance to the hall. Wait here. Let me see if it's safe. She disappeared into the chaos. Chapter 10. The Hunter's Snare. Kasha waited in the shadows of the corridor, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. The sounds of the battle raging in the great hall were terrifying, the snarls and growls of werewolves, the clash of claws and teeth, the shouts and cries of pain. She could smell the metallic tang of blood, the musky scent of fear, the acrid odor of burning. She strained to hear, to see, to understand what was happening, but the thick stone walls and the winding corridor obscured her view. She could only imagine the chaos, the violence, the struggle for survival that was unfolding just beyond her reach. She thought of Kaelin, his golden eyes, his strength, his unwavering protection. She hoped he was safe, that he was fighting for his pack, for his bride. She felt a surge of protectiveness towards him, a fierce determination to help him, to stand by his side, to face whatever danger awaited them. After what seemed like an eternity, Maeva returned, her face pale and streaked with soot, her clothes torn and stained with blood. She was breathing heavily, her violet eyes wide with alarm. It's worse than we thought, she said, her voice strained. Ryland has brought not only his pack, but hunters. Kasha's blood ran cold. Hunters. Humans who hunted werewolves, who sought to exterminate them, to rid the world of their kind. She had heard stories of them, whispered tales of their cruelty, their ruthlessness, their hatred. How many? Kasha asked, her voice trembling. 12 at least, Maeva said. Armed with silver-tipped arrows, with traps, with fire. Fire. The ultimate weapon against werewolves, the one thing that could truly harm them, that could burn away their magic, their very essence. The thought of Kaelin, of the others, facing such a threat filled her with terror. We have to help them, Kasha said, her voice firm. We can't just stand here. Maeva hesitated, her gaze searching Kasha's face. She seemed to be weighing the risks, the dangers, the potential consequences. It's too dangerous, she said. You are not a fighter. You would only be a liability. I may not be a fighter, Kasha said, her voice gaining strength. But I am not helpless. I can distract them. I can lure them away. Maeva's eyes widened in surprise, in admiration. You would risk your life? She asked. Kasha nodded. For Kaelin, she said. For the pack. For us. Maeva studied her for a long moment, her violet eyes filled with a new respect. Then, she nodded slowly. All right, she said. But be careful. And stay close to the shadows. Do not engage them directly. Your goal is to divert them, to buy us time. Maeva explained her plan, a desperate gamble to draw the hunters away from the main battle, to give Kaelin and the others a chance to regroup, to fight back. Kasha listened intently, her mind racing, her heart pounding. They crept through the corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares, staying close to the walls, their movements silent and stealthy. As they neared the back of the great hall, they could hear the sounds of the battle more clearly, the shouts of the hunters, the snarls of the werewolves, the crackling of fire. Maeva pointed to a small opening in the wall, a narrow passage that led to the outside, to a secluded area behind the main dwelling.
Go, she said.
Make as much noise as you can. Lead them away from the hall. I will create a diversion here. Kasha nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She took a deep breath and slipped through the opening, emerging into the cold night air. She found herself in a small clearing, surrounded by trees, the sounds of the battle still audible but muffled by the distance. She looked around, her eyes searching for a way to attract the hunters' attention, to draw them away from the hall. She spotted a pile of dry branches, left over from a recent wood-gathering expedition. An idea sparked in her mind, a dangerous, reckless idea, but one that might just work. She gathered the branches, piling them together, her hands trembling with urgency. She found a small flint and steel in her pocket, a relic from her old life, a tool she had used to start fires in her own hearth. She struck the flint against the steel, sparks flying, her heart pounding in her chest. After several attempts, a small flame ignited, flickering weakly, threatening to die out. She carefully nurtured the flame, adding more branches, blowing gently, coaxing it to grow. Finally, the fire caught, the flames leaping higher, casting a warm glow on the surrounding trees. The smoke began to rise, carrying the scent of burning wood, a signal to the hunters, a challenge, a lure. She waited, her body tense, her senses on high alert. She could hear the sounds of the hunters approaching, their heavy footsteps, their muttered commands, their excitement. They emerged from the trees, their faces grim, their eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. They were armed with bows and arrows, with swords and knives, with torches. Kasha stood her ground, her body silhouetted against the flames, her gaze fixed on the hunters. She was afraid, terrified, but she was also determined. She would not let them win. She would not let them harm Kaylin, the pack, her new family. She took one step back, then another. She had to lead them away. Far away. Chapter 11. Scars of the Past. The hunters, their eyes fixated on Kasha, advanced slowly, their weapons raised, their expressions a mixture of caution and anticipation. They were seasoned veterans, hardened by years of fighting werewolves, their movements precise and calculated. They spread out, forming a semicircle around Kasha and the fire, their intention clear to surround her, to trap her, to eliminate the perceived threat. Kasha stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't fight them, not directly. She was outnumbered, outmatched, her only weapon her wits and her determination. Well, one of the hunters, a burly man with a scarred face, said, his voice a guttural growl. What have we here? A stray lamb, wandered from the flock. She's with them. Another hunter, a younger man with a cruel sneer, said, with the beasts. She's one of them. Perhaps, the scarred hunter said, his eyes narrowing. Or perhaps she's a prize. A gift from the gods. A way to flush them out. He took a step closer, his hand reaching for Kasha, his intention clear. Kasha took a step back, her gaze darting from one hunter to the next, assessing their positions, their weapons, their weaknesses. Stay away from me, Kasha said, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. I am not afraid of you. The scarred hunter chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. Brave words, he said, but bravery will not save you. Not from us. Not from them. He gestured towards the sounds of the battle, still raging in the distance. Your friends are dying, he said, and you will be next. Kasha felt a surge of anger, of defiance. She would not let them intimidate her. She would not let them break her spirit. She would fight, not with weapons, but with her will, with her courage, with her love for Kaylin. She took another step back, towards the forest, her intention to draw them away from the hall, to lead them on a chase, to buy time for Kaylin and the others. I am not afraid, she repeated, her voice stronger now. I am not alone. The hunters exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to uncertainty. They sensed something in Kasha's demeanor, a strength, a resolve, that they hadn't anticipated. "What are you waiting for?" the scarred hunter said, his voice losing some of its confidence. "Take her." The hunters lunged, their weapons flashing in the firelight. Kasha dodged, ducked, weaved, her movements surprisingly agile, her body fueled by adrenaline. She used the fire as a shield, circling around it, keeping it between herself and the hunters. She taunted them, mocked them, her words designed to provoke them, to distract them, to make them careless. She spoke of their cruelty, their hatred, their cowardice. Her words seemed to have an effect. The hunters, enraged by her defiance, became more aggressive, their movements less precise, their focus shifting from capture to punishment. Kasha saw her opportunity. She darted towards the forest, her movements swift and unexpected. The hunters followed, their shouts and curses echoing through the trees. The chase was on. Kasha ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, her body pushed to its limits. She knew the forest, its paths and trails, its hidden dangers, better than the hunters. She used her knowledge to her advantage, leading them on a winding, treacherous route, deeper and deeper into the woods. She stumbled, fell, her body bruised and battered, but she kept going, driven by a fierce determination to protect Kalen, to protect the pack, to survive. As she ran, she thought of Kalen, of his golden eyes, of his strength, of his love. She thought of Maeva, of her sacrifice, of her courage, of her hope. She thought of the Holofong pack, of their ancient traditions, of their struggle for survival, of their future. She knew she couldn't run forever. She knew the hunters would eventually catch her. But she had bought them time, precious time, time for Kalen and the others to regroup, to fight back, to win. She stumbled again, her ankle twisting, a sharp pain shooting up her leg. She fell to the ground, her body racked with pain, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The hunters were closing in, their shadows looming over her, their weapons raised, their faces filled with a triumphant glee. Kasha closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. She had done all she could. She had fought, she had run, she had loved. But the blow never came. Instead, she heard a roar, a primal, terrifying roar that shook the very ground beneath her. She opened her eyes and saw Kalen. He stood between her and the hunters, his body transformed, his fur the color of midnight, his eyes burning with a golden fire. He was injured, his fur matted with blood, his body covered in scratches and bruises, but his spirit was unbroken. Behind him, other werewolves emerged from the shadows, their forms shifting, their eyes glowing with a fierce determination. Maeva was among them, her violet eyes blazing with anger, her claws extended, ready to fight. The hunters, taken by surprise, faltered, their confidence shattered, their weapons lowering slightly. Kalen turned to face her, his golden eyes softening as they met hers. And Kasha saw it then, without any doubt, without any reservation. He loved her. But the tender moment was cut short. A hunter's voice. They're weakened.
Now.
Chapter 12. A bond forged in fear. The hunter's cry shattered the brief moment of connection between Kasha and Kalen, galvanizing the remaining hunters into action. Arrows flew, silver-tipped and deadly, whistling through the air towards the werewolves. Kalen roared, deflecting one arrow with a swipe of his massive paw, but another grazed his shoulder, drawing a hiss of pain. Maeva and the other werewolves surged forward, engaging the hunters in a brutal, close-quarters combat. The forest echoed with the sounds of snarls, growls, the clang of metal on claws, and the screams of both humans and werewolves. Kasha, still lying on the ground, her ankle throbbing, watched in horror as the battle unfolded around her. She felt helpless, vulnerable, a burden to the very people she was trying to protect. Kalen fought with a ferocity born of desperation and love, his movements swift and powerful, his fangs and claws tearing through flesh and bone. He was protecting her, defending his pack, his home, his mate. But the hunters were relentless, their numbers and their weapons giving them an advantage. One by one, the werewolves fell, their bodies riddled with arrows, their wounds burning from the silver. Maeva fought bravely, her violet eyes blazing with defiance, but she was outnumbered, surrounded by hunters, her movements becoming slower, more labored. Kasha saw a hunter raise his bow, aiming directly at Kaelin's heart. She screamed, a wordless cry of terror and desperation, but it was too late. The arrow flew, straight and true, towards its target. But before it could reach Kaelin, Maeva intervened. She leaped in front of him, taking the arrow in her own chest, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. She crumpled to the ground, her body convulsing, her violet eyes staring up at Kaelin, filled with a mixture of love and regret. Kaelin roared, a sound of pure anguish and rage, his eyes blazing with a fury that Kasha had never seen before. He turned on the hunter who had shot Maeva, his movements a blur of speed and power, his fangs sinking deep into the hunter's throat, silencing his screams forever. The remaining hunters, seeing their comrade fall, their courage faltered. They began to retreat, their movements disorganized, their fear palpable. Kaelin pursued them, his rage unchecked, his grief fueling his attack. He tore through them, his claws and fangs leaving a trail of carnage in his wake. Finally, the last hunter fell, his body lying still on the forest floor. The battle was over. Kaelin stood amidst the carnage, his body heaving, his fur matted with blood, his golden eyes filled with a profound sorrow. He looked around, at the fallen werewolves, at the dead hunters, at the devastation that surrounded him. He then turned his gaze to Kasha, his eyes softening as they met hers. He limped towards her, his transformation reversing, his human form gradually returning. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her, to check for injuries. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse, filled with concern. Kasha nodded, her own injuries forgotten in the face of his pain, his grief. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Maeva," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She saved you." Kaelin's eyes filled with tears, his body trembling with the force of his emotions. He nodded, unable to speak, his grief too profound for words. He gently lifted Kasha into his arms, her body cradled against his chest. He carried her away from the battlefield, away from the death and destruction, towards the safety of Holofong. As he walked, he spoke, his voice low and filled with pain. He spoke of Maeva, of their past, of their love, of the sacrifice she had made. He spoke of his guilt, his regret, his loss. "She was my intended," he said, his voice strained. Before you. We were to be mated, to lead the pack together. But the curse had intervened." He explained how Maeva, understanding the loophole in the curse, had willingly stepped aside, allowing Kaelin to seek a human bride, hoping to break the cycle of pain and sacrifice. She had chosen to remain in Holofong, to serve the pack, to watch over him. "She loved you," Kasha said, her voice soft. "She always loved you." Kaelin nodded, his tears falling onto Kasha's face. "And I loved her," he said. "But it was a different kind of love. A love born of duty, of tradition, of expectation. It was not this." He looked at Kasha, his golden eyes filled with a new intensity, a new depth of emotion. "You," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "You have shown me what love truly is. A love that is free, a love that is chosen, a love that is powerful." He carried her into Holofong, into the great hall, where the remaining werewolves were tending to their wounded, mourning their dead. They looked at Kaelin and Kasha, their expressions a mixture of relief, sorrow, and hope. Kaelin laid Kasha down on a bed of furs, his touch gentle and caring. He stayed by her side, tending to her injuries, his presence a source of comfort and strength. He looked up, addressing the remaining members of the pack, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Maeva gave her life for us tonight. She showed us the meaning of true sacrifice. She showed us the way. to freedom. The night was dark and filled with grief, and yet there was a flicker, like a candle flame in a storm. Chapter 13.
The Ritual of Binding.
The days following the battle were filled with a somber quiet, a period of mourning and reflection for the Halofong pack. The fallen werewolves were honored with ancient rituals, their bodies laid to rest in a sacred grove deep within the forest, their spirits returned to the wild they had loved. Kasha, her ankle slowly healing, spent her time learning more about the pack, their customs, their traditions, their history. She helped tend to the wounded, offering comfort and support, her presence a source of strength and hope. She found a quiet solace in the rhythm of their lives, the close-knit community, the connection to the natural world. She and Kaelin spent hours together, talking, sharing, their bond deepening with each passing day. He spoke of his childhood, his training, his responsibilities as the pack leader. She spoke of her life in the village, her marriage, her loss, her acceptance of her new destiny. They spoke of Maeva, of her sacrifice, of her love for Kaelin, of the hope she had placed in Kasha. They mourned her loss together, their shared grief forging a connection that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Kaelin explained the intricacies of the curse, the loophole that Maeva had discovered, the choice that Kasha now faced. He didn't pressure her, he didn't try to influence her decision, he simply offered her his support, his understanding, his love. "It must be your choice, Kasha," he said, his golden eyes searching her face. "A choice made freely, from the heart. A choice that will determine not only your fate, but the fate of the entire pack." Kasha knew what she had to do. She had witnessed the brutality of the curse, the pain and suffering it had caused, the sacrifices it had demanded. She had seen the love that bound the Halofong pack together, their resilience, their strength, their hope for a better future. And she had found love, a love that was unexpected, a love that was forbidden, a love that was real. She loved Kaelin, not just as her protector, her intended, but as a man, a leader, a soulmate. She decided to undergo the ritual of binding, the ancient ceremony that would solidify her connection to Kaelin, to the pack, to the magic of Halofong. Elder Lyra, her face etched with wisdom and weariness, explained the ritual. It was a symbolic act, a joining of two souls, a merging of two worlds, a breaking of the curse. "It will not be easy, Kasha," Elder Lyra said. "The ritual will test you, challenge you, push you to your limits. But if you are strong, if your heart is true, you will succeed. You will break the curse, and you will free us all." The ritual was to take place at the full moon, under the ancient oak tree that stood at the heart of Halofong, the very tree where Maeva had been laid to rest. The entire pack would be present, witnessing the ceremony, their hopes and prayers resting on Kasha's shoulders. The day of the ritual arrived, a day filled with anticipation and trepidation. Kasha dressed in a simple gown of white, woven from the fibers of the forest, her hair adorned with wildflowers. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement, of doubt and determination. Kaelin met her at the entrance to the great hall, his golden eyes filled with love and support. He was dressed in his ceremonial garb, his body adorned with ancient symbols, his presence radiating a strength and confidence that reassured her. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft. Kasha nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes," she said, "I am." He took her hand, his touch gentle and warm, and led her out of the hall, towards the ancient oak tree. The pack followed, their movements silent and respectful, their eyes fixed on Kasha, their hopes and prayers accompanying her every step. The moon, full and luminous, hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow on the clearing. The ancient oak tree, its branches reaching towards the heavens, stood as a silent witness to the ceremony, its presence radiating an ancient power. Elder Lyra stood beneath the tree, her voice ringing out in the stillness of the night, reciting the ancient words of the ritual, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. Kasha and Kaelin stood before her, their hands clasped, their eyes locked, their souls connected. The ritual began. Kasha was losing herself in it, in the chanting, in the power emanating from the earth, when a sharp pain pierced her hand. She looked down. The mark, it was glowing. Chapter 14. Broken Chains of Duty. The searing pain that shot through Kasha's hand, originating from the Holofong mark, was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It felt as if the very essence of the forest, of the ancient magic that flowed through Holofong, was coursing through her veins, burning away the doubt, the fear, the resistance. The mark glowed with an intense, pulsating light, illuminating the clearing, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the assembled werewolves. The chanting of Elder Lyra intensified, her voice rising in a crescendo, her words echoing through the night. Kasha felt a strange sensation, a feeling of dissolving. Her body felt light, ethereal, as if she were merging with the air, with the trees, with the very fabric of Holofong. She looked at Kalen, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of awe and concern. He saw her pain, her struggle, but he also saw her strength, her resolve, her love. He squeezed her hand, his touch a reassuring anchor in the swirling vortex of magic that surrounded her. He didn't speak, but his eyes conveyed a silent message: I am here. I am with you. You are not alone. The pain intensified, becoming almost unbearable, but Kasha held on, her gaze locked with Kalen's, her heart filled with a fierce determination. She would not give in, she would not falter, she would not break. She thought of Maeva, of her sacrifice, of her hope for a better future. She thought of the Holofong pack, of their resilience, of their strength, of their love for one another. She thought of Kalen, of his love for her, of his unwavering support, of his belief in her. And then she spoke. I choose, she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the clearing. I choose to stay. I choose to love. I choose Holofong. The words, spoken from the depths of her heart, were a declaration, a commitment, a breaking of the curse. The moment she uttered those words, the pain subsided, replaced by a wave of warmth, of peace, of belonging. The glowing mark on her hand dimmed, its light fading, its power integrated into her very being. The chanting of Elder Lyra ceased, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the soft cries of relief from the assembled werewolves. The ritual was complete. Kasha felt a profound sense of transformation. She was no longer just Kasha Winter, the widow from Oakhaven, the human bride taken against her will. She was Kasha of Holofong, a member of the pack, a lover, a leader. Kalen released her hand, his golden eyes filled with tears of joy, of relief, of love. He embraced her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close, his body trembling with the force of his emotions. You did it, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You broke the curse. Kasha leaned into his embrace, her body finding comfort and solace in his arms. She felt a sense of peace, of fulfillment, of belonging that she had never known before. Elder Lyra approached them, her face radiant with joy, her eyes shining with a newfound hope. The curse is broken, she said, her voice strong and clear. The cycle of pain and sacrifice is over. You, Kasha Winter, you have freed us all. The werewolves erupted in cheers, their howls of joy echoing through the forest, celebrating their liberation, their newfound freedom. They surrounded Kasha and Kalen, embracing them, thanking them, their faces filled with gratitude and love. The night was filled with celebration, with feasting, with dancing, with the joyous sounds of a people reunited, a people free. Kasha and Kalen, their hands intertwined, their hearts connected, stood together, witnessing the dawn of a new era for the Holofong pack. As the celebration continued, Kalen led Kasha away from the crowd, towards a secluded spot overlooking the valley. The moon, still shining brightly, cast a silvery glow on the landscape, illuminating the waterfall, the river, the beauty of Holofong. They stood in silence, their bodies close, their hearts beating in unison. Kalen turned to Kasha, his golden eyes searching her face, his expression filled with love and adoration. I love you, Kasha, he said, his voice sincere and heartfelt. Not because of the mark, not because of the curse, but because of you. Because of your strength, your courage, your kindness. Kasha's eyes filled with tears, her heart overflowing with emotion. I love you too, Kaylin, she said, her voice soft. More than I ever thought possible. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was tender, passionate, a seal of their love, a promise of their future. It was a kiss that spoke of shared pain, of overcoming obstacles, of a bond forged in fear and strengthened by choice. It was a kiss, under the waning moon, that marked not an ending, but a beginning. Chapter 15. The Unveiling of Secrets. The weeks that followed the breaking of the curse were a time of transformation and renewal for the Holofong pack. The weight of centuries of obligation and fear had been lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. The werewolves, freed from the constraints of the ancient law, embraced their newfound freedom with a joyous exuberance. Kasha, now fully integrated into the pack, found herself taking on a leadership role alongside Kaylin. Her wisdom, her compassion, her understanding of both the human and werewolf worlds made her a valuable asset to the community. She helped bridge the gap between the two cultures, fostering understanding and cooperation, creating a new path for the Holofong pack. She learned more about the magic of Holofong, the power that flowed through the earth, through the trees, through the werewolves themselves. She discovered her own innate abilities, her connection to the natural world, her ability to heal, to soothe, to protect. She and Kaylin grew closer, their love deepening with each passing day. They explored the forest together, sharing secrets, dreams, and passions. They discovered hidden groves, ancient ruins, forgotten pathways, their bond strengthening with each new adventure. One day, while exploring a remote section of the forest, they stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance concealed by a thick curtain of vines. Intrigued, they entered, their senses heightened, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The cave was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of wolves, humans, and other creatures that Kasha didn't recognize. The air was thick with magic, a palpable sense of ancient power, a feeling of mystery. As they ventured deeper into the cave, they discovered a large chamber, its center dominated by a crystal-clear pool of water. The water glowed with an ethereal light, illuminating the chamber, revealing more carvings on the walls, more secrets. Kaylin recognized some of the symbols, ancient runes that predated the curse, symbols that spoke of the origins of the Holofong pack, of their connection to the spirit world. This is a sacred place, Kaylin said, his voice hushed with reverence. A place of power, of knowledge, of truth. As they examined the carvings, they noticed a recurring motif: a wolf with golden eyes, standing alongside a human woman, their hands clasped, their gazes locked. The image was strikingly familiar, a reflection of their own bond, their own love. Kasha felt a shiver run down her spine, a sense of recognition. She reached out and touched the carving, her fingers tracing the outline of the wolf, of the woman, of their connection. Suddenly, the water in the pool began to ripple, the ethereal light intensifying, the air growing thicker with magic. A vision appeared in the water, a swirling vortex of images, of sounds, of memories. Kasha and Kaylin watched in awe as the vision unfolded, revealing a story that predated the curse, a story of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. They saw a young werewolf, his eyes burning with a golden fire, his heart filled with love for a human woman. They saw their forbidden romance, their secret meetings, their passionate embraces. They saw the opposition they faced, the hatred, the fear, the violence. They saw the sorceress, not as a villain, but as a protector, a guardian of the balance between the human and spirit worlds. They saw her fear of the werewolf's power, her belief that their union with humans would disrupt that balance, would destroy both worlds. They saw the war, not as a conflict between good and evil, but as a clash of ideologies, a struggle for survival, a tragedy. They saw the curse, not as a punishment, but as a protection. A way to prevent further bloodshed, to maintain the balance, to preserve both worlds. The vision ended, the water in the pool returning to its stillness, the ethereal light fading, the air growing less charged. Kasha and Kaelin stood in silence, their minds reeling from the revelations, their hearts filled with a new understanding. The curse, Kasha said, her voice trembling. It wasn't what we thought. Kaelin nodded, his golden eyes filled with a profound sadness.
It was a misunderstanding, he said.
A tragedy born of fear, of prejudice, of ignorance. They had broken the curse, but they had also uncovered a truth that challenged their assumptions, that forced them to reevaluate their history, their beliefs, their future. The sorceress hadn't been trying to weaken them, to punish them. She had been trying to protect them, to protect everyone. The curse had been a desperate act, a flawed solution, but one born of a desire to maintain balance, not to inflict pain.
What do we do now?
Kasha asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Kaelin looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a new determination.
We learn, he said. We grow.
We evolve. We use this knowledge to build a better future, a future where humans and werewolves can coexist, where the balance between the worlds is maintained, where love can flourish. They left the cave, their hearts heavy with the weight of the newly discovered truth, but also filled with a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to building a future based on understanding, on cooperation, on love. The secrets of the past had been unveiled, and now it was up to them to shape the future. They looked at each other, a shared knowledge burning bright, a challenge accepted. They had work to do. Chapter 16. Heart of the Wolf. The revelation in the hidden cave profoundly impacted Kasha and Kaelin, shifting their understanding of the Holophong Pack's history and their place within it. They returned to the pack with a newfound sense of responsibility, a desire to share their knowledge and guide their people towards a future that honored the true intent of the sorceress's actions, a future of balance and coexistence. Elder Lyra, upon hearing their story and seeing the ancient carvings they had meticulously copied, convened a council of the eldest and wisest members of the pack. The cave's revelations sparked hours of intense discussion, debate, and reinterpretation of their long-held beliefs. The initial resistance to accepting a truth so different from their ingrained narrative gradually gave way to a cautious acceptance, a willingness to embrace a new perspective. Akasha, with her unique perspective as both a human and a member of the pack, played a crucial role in these discussions. She spoke eloquently about the human world, its fears and misconceptions about werewolves, but also its capacity for understanding and acceptance. She emphasized the importance of communication, of building bridges instead of walls, of fostering trust instead of fear. Kaelin, inspired by Kasha's words and the ancient wisdom revealed in the cave, proposed a radical shift in the pack's approach to the outside world. He suggested reaching out to the neighboring human villages, initiating dialogue, dispelling myths, and fostering a spirit of cooperation. This proposal was met with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Some werewolves, scarred by centuries of conflict and persecution, were hesitant to trust humans, fearing betrayal and violence. Others, younger and more open-minded, saw the potential for a brighter future, a future free from the shadows of the past. After much debate, the council agreed to Kaelin's proposal, albeit with caution and a carefully planned approach. They decided to start with Oakhaven, Kasha's former village, a place where she still had connections, a place where her transformation could serve as a powerful symbol of hope and possibility. Kasha and Kaelin, accompanied by a small delegation of werewolves, prepared for their journey to Oakhaven. Kasha felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement, anticipation and trepidation. She was returning to her former home, not as the quiet widow, but as a leader of the Holophong Pack, a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of change. Before they departed, Kaelin took Kasha to a secluded spot overlooking the valley, a place where they had shared many intimate moments. He presented her with a gift, a beautiful necklace crafted from silver and adorned with a single, glowing moonstone. "This is for you, Kasha," he said, his voice soft. a symbol of our love, of our bond, of our future. Kasha's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the necklace, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool surface of the moonstone. "It's beautiful, Kaylin," she said, her voice choked with emotion.
"Thank you."
He fastened the necklace around her neck, his touch gentle and loving. He then took her hands in his golden eyes searching her face. "I know this will be difficult, Kasha," he said. "Returning to Oakhaven, facing your former neighbors, your friends. But you're not alone. I am with you always. And the pack is with you, supporting you, believing in you." Kasha nodded, her heart filled with gratitude and love.
"I know," she said.
"And I am ready." They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating in unison. They drew strength from each other, their love a beacon of hope in the face of uncertainty. As they set off towards Oakhaven, Kasha felt a sense of purpose, a determination to succeed in their mission, to build a bridge between two worlds, to create a future where humans and werewolves could coexist in peace and harmony. The journey would be challenging, the obstacles would be many, but she was ready. She had Kaylin by her side, the pack at her back, and the love in her heart to guide her way. She had a sense, a feeling, as they crossed the boundary of Hollowfong and stepped into the familiar path toward her old village, that the reception would be anything but peaceful. And the feeling grew stronger with every step. Chapter 17. A Love Forbidden. The journey to Oakhaven was filled with a tense anticipation. Kasha, walking beside Kaylin, felt a mixture of emotions swirling within her: nervousness, excitement, hope, and a lingering fear of the unknown. She knew that returning to her former village, transformed as she was, would be a challenge, a test of the fragile peace they were hoping to build. The familiar sights and sounds of the path leading to Oakhaven brought back a flood of memories of her life with Thomas, of her quiet routine, of the community she had once belonged to. But those memories now seemed distant, faded, belonging to a different lifetime, a different person. As they approached the village outskirts, they could hear the sounds of activity: the hammering of a blacksmith, the chatter of children playing, the barking of dogs. But as they drew closer, the sounds began to change, shifting from the familiar rhythms of village life to a tense silence, a hushed apprehension. The villagers, noticing their approach, stopped what they were doing, their faces turning towards Kasha and the werewolves, their expressions a mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief. Some crossed themselves, muttering prayers. Others retreated into their homes, their doors slamming shut, their windows shuttered. Elder Bran, his face pale and drawn, stepped forward to meet them, his hand resting on the hilt of a hunting knife strapped to his belt. He was accompanied by a group of villagers, armed with pitchforks, axes, and other makeshift weapons, their faces grim, their bodies tense. "Kasha?" Elder Bran said, his voice trembling slightly. "Is that you?" Kasha stepped forward, her head held high, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, Bran," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It is I." A murmur rippled through the assembled villagers, their expressions shifting from disbelief to horror. Some gasped, others whispered, their words filled with fear and revulsion. "You're one of them," a woman cried out, her voice filled with anguish. "A monster. A beast." "I am not a monster," Kasha retorted, her voice firm. "I am Kasha, and I am changed, but I am still me." She gestured towards Kaylin and the other werewolves, who stood silently behind her, their eyes watchful, their bodies tense. "They are not monsters either," she said. "They are the Hollowfong pack, and they have come in peace." "Peace?" Elder Bran scoffed, his voice laced with skepticism. "You expect us to believe that? After what you did? After what they took?" He looked at Kaylin, his eyes filled with hatred and resentment. "You," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "You took her. You marked her. You cursed her." Kaylin stepped forward, his golden eyes meeting Elder Bran's gaze. "She bears the mark," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But she chose to stay. She chose us. She chose love." "Love?" a villager shouted. There is no love between a human and a beast. It is an abomination, a sin against nature. The tension in the air was thick, palpable, a powder keg waiting to explode. Kasha knew that one wrong word, one wrong move, could trigger a violent confrontation, shattering any hope of peace. She stepped between Kaelin and Elder Bran, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please," she said, her voice pleading, "hear us out. We have come to offer you understanding, to offer you cooperation, to offer you a future free from fear." She spoke of the curse, of its true origins, of the sorceress's intentions, of the revelations they had discovered in the hidden cave. She spoke of the Holophong Pack's desire for peace, their willingness to coexist with humans, their hope for a better future. Her words, spoken with passion and sincerity, seemed to have a small effect. Some of the villagers, their faces softening slightly, lowered their weapons, their expressions shifting from hostility to curiosity. But others remained unconvinced, their hatred and fear too deeply ingrained to be easily overcome. Elder Bran, his face still grim, his hand still resting on his knife, remained skeptical. "Words are cheap, Kasha," he said. "How can we trust you? How can we trust them?" Kasha knew that she had to do something drastic, something that would demonstrate her commitment to peace, her loyalty to both her former village and her new pack. She stepped even closer to one man holding an axe. He eyed her nervously, ready to strike. "Please," she said softly, extending her bare arm. "Give me your axe." He balked. His grip tightened. She locked her eyes on his, pleading silently. "Please understand, I need you to," she said, louder this time. He looked around, confused, wary. But he handed it to her, slowly. She held it up, turning it over in her hands. The wood of the handle was worn smooth. Then, in one sharp, decisive motion, she brought the axe head down on her own left shoulder. Hard. Gasps, screams. Kaelin lunged forward, but stopped, his eyes wide with shock. Blood welled up around the Holophong mark, soaking into her dress. The axe clattered to the ground. "The market is gone," she said, her voice strained, but firm. "I am no longer bound by it. I am free. And I choose peace. I choose understanding. I choose both." The villagers and the werewolves were stunned into silence. Chapter 18. The Price of Freedom. The silence that followed Kasha's shocking act was profound, broken only by her ragged breathing and the soft whimpers of some of the villagers. The sight of her blood, mingling with the remnants of the Holophong mark, was a visceral demonstration of her commitment, a sacrifice that transcended words, a breaking of chains. Kaelin, his face a mask of shock and concern, rushed to her side, his hands hovering over her wound, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. He wanted to heal her, to use his own magic to close the wound, but he hesitated, understanding the significance of her act, the message she was sending. Kasha, her face pale but resolute, placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "No," she said, her voice weak but firm. "Let them see. Let them understand." She turned to face the villagers, her eyes searching their faces, her gaze lingering on Elder Bran, his expression a mixture of disbelief and guilt. "I am no longer bound by the mark," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. "I am free to choose. And I choose peace. I choose to bridge the gap between our worlds, to build a future where humans and werewolves can coexist, where fear is replaced by understanding." Her words, spoken with sincerity and conviction, resonated with the villagers, their hearts touched by her sacrifice, their minds opened to the possibility of change. The tension in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious curiosity, a hesitant acceptance. Elder Bran, his face still pale, his hand trembling, lowered his knife, his gaze dropping to the ground. He looked at Kasha, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and respect. "Kasha," he said, his voice choked with emotion. I did not understand. I was blinded by fear, by hatred." He stepped forward, his arms outstretched, offering a gesture of peace, of reconciliation. Kasha met him halfway, embracing him, their tears mingling, their bond restored. The other villagers, following Elder Brand's lead, lowered their weapons, their faces softening, their expressions shifting from hostility to acceptance. They approached Kasha and the werewolves, offering apologies, offering friendship. The day that had begun with fear and suspicion ended with hope and understanding. The bridge between two worlds had been built, not with words, but with blood, with sacrifice, with love. Kalen, his heart filled with pride and love for Kasha, tended to her wound, his touch gentle and caring. He used his own magic, combined with herbs and remedies from the forest, to heal her injury, leaving only a faint scar, a reminder of her sacrifice, a symbol of her freedom. The werewolves and the villagers, working together, prepared a feast, a celebration of their newfound peace, a testament to their shared humanity, their common future. They shared food, stories, laughter, their differences fading away, replaced by a sense of community, of belonging. As the night wore on, Kasha and Kalen stood together, watching the celebration, their hearts filled with joy and gratitude. They had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. They had faced their fears. They had triumphed. "You did it, Kasha," Kalen said, his voice filled with admiration. "You brought peace to our worlds." Kasha smiled, her eyes shining with love. "We did it, Kalen," she said. Together. They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating in unison. They knew that the path ahead would not be easy, that challenges would still arise, that the scars of the past would take time to heal. But they were ready. They had each other. They had their love. They had their community. As they stood there, under the starry sky, the sounds of laughter and celebration filling the air, they felt a sense of hope, of possibility, of a future filled with peace, understanding, and love. The village, normally so quiet at night, was alive. The wound, however. Kasha knew the magic of Holofong had healed the physical damage, but the severing that was something else entirely. She could feel it, a hollowness where the bond had been. A piece of her was gone, and that, she knew, would take much longer to heal, if it ever did. Chapter 19. The Gathering Storm. The peace that Kasha and Kalen had brokered between the Holofong pack and Oakhaven was a fragile thing, a tender shoot pushing through hardened earth. It required constant nurturing, careful tending, and an unwavering commitment from both sides to overcome the ingrained prejudices and fears of generations. While the majority of the villagers and werewolves embraced the new era of cooperation, there were those who remained skeptical, resistant to change, clinging to the old ways of hatred and suspicion. Rumors began to spread, whispers of dissent, fueled by fear and misinformation. In Oakhaven, a small faction of villagers, led by a disgruntled hunter named Silas, refused to accept Kasha's transformation and the presence of the werewolves. They saw it as a betrayal, an abomination, a threat to their way of life. They plotted in secret, gathering weapons, planning to disrupt the peace, to reclaim their village. Within the Holofong pack, a similar faction, led by Ryland, who had never forgiven Kalen for taking Kasha and breaking the curse, harbored resentment and a desire for revenge. They saw the peace with humans as a weakness, a dilution of their power, a betrayal of their heritage. They too plotted in secret, gathering allies, planning to overthrow Kalen, to restore the old ways. Kasha and Kalen, aware of these undercurrents of dissent, worked tirelessly to strengthen the bonds between the two communities. They organized joint hunting parties, shared meals, cultural exchanges, and educational programs, fostering understanding and cooperation. But the seeds of discord had been sown, and the whispers of dissent grew louder, more insistent, threatening to unravel the fragile peace they had so carefully constructed. One evening, as Kasha and Kalen were returning to Holofong from a visit to Oakhaven, they were ambushed by a group of Silas's followers. The attack was swift and brutal, the hunters armed with silver-tipped arrows and weapons, their faces filled with hatred and fanaticism. Kalen, his instincts honed by years of fighting, reacted instantly, protecting Kasha, engaging the hunters in a fierce battle. But they were outnumbered, surrounded, their attackers relentless and well-organized. Kasha, though wounded in the initial attack, fought bravely alongside Kaelin, using her knowledge of the forest and her newfound abilities to defend herself and her mate. But the hunters were too many, their weapons too deadly, their hatred too powerful. Kaelin, seeing that Kasha was in danger, made a desperate decision. He pushed her away, shielding her from the attackers, drawing their attention to himself, allowing her to escape. Kasha, horrified, watched as Kaelin was overwhelmed by the hunters, his body riddled with arrows, his strength failing, his life ebbing away. She screamed his name, a cry of anguish and despair, but it was too late. Kaelin fell to the ground, his golden eyes dimming, his body still, his spirit departing. The hunters, seeing their victory, let out a triumphant roar, their hatred momentarily sated, their mission accomplished. They left Kaelin's body lying in the forest, a trophy of their victory, a warning to others. Kasha, her heart shattered, her world torn apart, crawled to Kaelin's side, her tears falling onto his lifeless face. She cradled him in her arms, her body trembling with grief, her soul filled with a pain so profound, so unbearable. She had lost him, her love, her protector, her mate. The peace she had fought so hard to achieve, the future she had dreamed of, had been snatched away from her, leaving her alone, broken, and filled with a burning desire for revenge. As she sat there, in the darkness of the forest, holding Kaelin's lifeless body, she felt a surge of power, a surge of magic. It was not the gentle, healing magic she had learned from the Holofong pack, but something else, something darker, something primal. It was the magic of the curse, the ancient power that had been unleashed by her sacrifice, the power that had been dormant within her, waiting for a trigger, waiting for a moment of profound loss. The magic surged through her veins, filling her with a strength she had never known, a rage she had never felt, a determination to avenge Kaelin's death, to punish those who had taken him from her, to restore balance to her shattered world. She rose to her feet, her eyes burning with a fierce, golden light, her body radiating a power that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. She was no longer just Kasha Winter, the widow from Oakhaven, the bridge between two worlds. She was something else, something more. She was vengeance. She was fury. She was the heart of the wolf, awakened. She knew what she had to do. And she knew where to start. Ryland. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. Kasha, fueled by grief and the raw, untamed magic surging through her, returned to Holofong, not with a message of peace, but with a declaration of war. The news of Kaelin's death and the manner of his murder spread through the pack like wildfire, igniting a fury that matched her own. The werewolves, their grief amplified by their inherent connection to the wild, howled their anguish to the moon, their cries echoing through the forest, a chorus of sorrow and rage. They were ready to fight, to avenge their fallen leader, to destroy those who had dared to break the fragile peace. Kasha, her eyes blazing with a golden light, addressed the assembled pack, her voice resonating with power and authority. She spoke of Kaelin's sacrifice, of his dream of a future where humans and werewolves could coexist, of the betrayal that had shattered that dream. "They have taken him from us," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They have murdered our leader, our friend, our love. They have declared war on us, and we will answer." She outlined her plan, a swift and decisive strike against both Silas's faction in Oakhaven and Ryland's rebellious faction within the Holofong pack. She would not seek peace, she would not offer understanding, she would deliver justice. The werewolves, their loyalty to Kaelin and their thirst for revenge fueling their resolve, roared their approval, their claws extended, their fangs bared, ready to follow Kasha into battle. Under the cover of darkness, Kasha led the Holofong pack towards Oakhaven. They moved with a speed and silence born of their connection to the forest, their senses heightened, their hearts filled with a cold, burning fury. They found Silas and his followers gathered in the village square, celebrating their victory, their weapons piled carelessly nearby, their guard down. The attack was swift and brutal, the werewolves unleashing their pent-up rage, their claws and fangs tearing through flesh and bone. Silas, his face a mask of terror and disbelief, tried to rally his men, but it was too late. The hunters, caught off guard and unprepared for the ferocity of the attack, were quickly overwhelmed, their weapons useless against the enraged werewolves. Kasha, her movements fluid and deadly, fought with a power she had never known before, the magic of the curse fueling her strength, her speed, her rage. She sought out Silas, her eyes burning with a golden fire, her heart filled with a cold, burning desire for revenge. She found him cowering in the shadows, his face pale, his body trembling. He raised his hands in a futile gesture of surrender, his eyes pleading for mercy. "Please," he begged, his voice choked with fear. "Spare me." I did not know. Kasha's gaze was unwavering, her heart unmoved by his pleas. "You knew," she said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You knew what you were doing. You chose hatred. You chose violence. And now you will pay the price." With a swift, decisive movement, she ended his life, her claws delivering a final, fatal blow. The vengeance, though swift, felt hollow. With Silas and his faction eliminated, Kasha turned her attention to Ryland and his followers. She led the remaining werewolves back to Hollowfong, where Ryland, emboldened by Kaelin's death, had attempted to seize control of the pack. The confrontation took place in the Great Hall, the very place where Kasha had first been accepted into the Hollowfong pack, the place where she had broken the curse, the place where she had found love. Ryland, surrounded by his loyalists, stood defiant, his eyes filled with hatred and ambition. He saw Kasha enter, the remaining loyal members of Hollowfong behind her, and sneered. "You," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The human who brought us to ruin. The one who stole our leader, and brought his death upon us." Kasha met his gaze, her eyes burning with a golden fire. "Kaelin's death is on your hands, Ryland," she said, her voice resonating with power. "Your ambition, your hatred, your betrayal." "He was weak," Ryland roared. "He sought peace with humans. He betrayed our heritage. He deserved to die." The two factions faced each other, the tension in the air thick, palpable, a final confrontation inevitable. But before the battle could begin, Kasha stepped forward, her voice ringing out in the Great Hall. "Stop," she commanded. "This ends now." She spoke of Kaelin's vision, of his dream of a future where humans and werewolves could coexist, of the peace they had achieved, of the betrayal that had shattered that peace. She spoke of the curse, of its true origins, of the sorceress's intentions, of the revelations they had discovered in the hidden cave. She spoke of the need for understanding, for cooperation, for love. Her words, spoken with passion and conviction, had a profound effect on the assembled werewolves. Some, their hearts touched by her words, their minds open to the possibility of change, lowered their claws, their expressions shifting from anger to doubt. Others, including Ryland, remained defiant, their hatred too deeply ingrained to be easily overcome. "You are a fool, Kasha," Ryland said, his voice filled with scorn. "You cannot change what we are. We are wolves. We are predators. We will not submit to humans." He lunged at Kasha, his claws extended, his fangs bared, his intention clear. But Kasha was ready. She met his attack, her own body transforming, shifting, growing. Fur sprouted from her skin, her bones cracked and reformed, her teeth elongated into sharp fangs. She was no longer just human, she was werewolf. The curse had been broken, but something remained. A gift, perhaps. A choice. The two wolves clashed, a whirlwind of fur and claws and teeth. The battle was fierce, brutal, a fight to the death. Kasha, fueled by her grief, her rage, and the ancient magic that flowed through her veins, fought with a power and skill that surprised even herself. She was faster, stronger, more ferocious than Ryland. Finally, after a long and brutal struggle, she gained the upper hand. She pinned Ryland to the ground, her fangs bared at his throat, her golden eyes burning with a fierce, triumphant light. She could end it. She could kill him, avenge Kaelin's death, eliminate the last threat to the fragile peace she had fought so hard to achieve. But she hesitated. She looked into Ryland's eyes, and she saw not just hatred and ambition, but also fear. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of losing his way of life. She saw a reflection of herself, of the fear and uncertainty she had felt when she had first been taken to Holophong, of the resistance she had faced, of the transformation she had undergone. And she understood. She understood that violence begets violence, that hatred begets hatred, that revenge does not bring peace. She released Ryland, her fangs retracting, her golden eyes softening. "This ends now," she repeated, her voice filled with a newfound compassion. "We will not fight each other. We will not destroy each other. We will learn to live together. Or we will all perish." Ryland, stunned by her mercy, his body trembling, his spirit broken, lowered his head in submission. The remaining werewolves, witnessing Kasha's act of compassion, followed suit, their anger dissipating, their hearts opening. The final confrontation had ended, not with death, but with understanding. The war was over. Peace, true peace, had finally been achieved. But at what cost? Epilogue. The years that followed were not easy. The scars of the past, both physical and emotional, took time to heal. The integration of the Holophong pack and the villagers of Oakhaven was a slow, gradual process, filled with challenges, setbacks, and occasional moments of conflict. But Kasha, with her unwavering commitment to peace and her unique ability to bridge the two worlds, guided them through the difficult times, fostering understanding, cooperation, and trust. She became a symbol of hope, a leader respected by both humans and werewolves, a legend. She never forgot Kaelin. His memory lived on in her heart, a constant source of strength and inspiration. She often visited the secluded spot in the forest where he had fallen, sharing her thoughts, her feelings, her love with his spirit. She never remarried, her heart forever bound to the golden-eyed wolf who had claimed her, transformed her, and loved her. But she was not alone. She had the Holophong pack, her family, her friends, her community. She helped rebuild Oakhaven, transforming it into a thriving center of trade and cooperation between humans and werewolves. The village, once a symbol of fear and isolation, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of understanding and acceptance. The Holophong pack, under Kasha's guidance, flourished. They learned to live in harmony with the humans, sharing their knowledge of the forest, their skills, their magic. They became protectors of the balance between the two worlds, guardians of the peace, a force for good. Ryland, humbled by Kasha's mercy and transformed by her example, became one of her most loyal supporters. He learned to control his anger, to channel his strength into constructive pursuits, to embrace the new era of cooperation. The story of Kasha Winter, the human woman who became a werewolf, who broke an ancient curse, who brought peace to two warring factions, became a legend, whispered around campfires, told to children, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the greatest enemies can become friends, that even the most forbidden love can triumph. One crisp autumn evening, many years after the final confrontation, Kasha, her hair now completely silver, her body bearing the marks of time, but her spirit still strong and vibrant, stood overlooking the valley of Holophong. The setting sun cast a golden glow on the landscape, illuminating the waterfall, the river, the homes of her people. She felt a presence beside her, a familiar warmth, a gentle touch. She turned and saw him. He was not flesh and blood, not a physical being, but a spirit, a manifestation of the ancient magic that flowed through Holophong, a memory made real. Kaelin stood before her, his golden eyes shining with love, his smile radiant, his presence a comfort and a joy. "Kasha," he said, his voice a gentle whisper, a melody from the past. "Kaelin," she replied, her voice filled with emotion, her heart overflowing with love. They embraced, their spirits merging, their love transcending the boundaries of life and death, their bond eternal. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You brought peace to our worlds. You fulfilled your destiny. You lived." Kasha smiled, her eyes shining with tears of joy.
"We did it," she said.
Together, they stood there for a long moment, their spirits intertwined, their love a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Then, as the first stars began to appear in the sky, Kalen faded away, his spirit returning to the realm from which he had come, leaving Kasha alone, but not lonely. She knew that he would always be with her, in her heart, in her memories, in the magic of Holofong. She knew that their love was eternal, their bond unbreakable, their destiny fulfilled. She turned and walked back towards the village, her heart filled with peace, with gratitude, with love. The future was uncertain, the challenges would always be there, but she was ready. She was Kasha Winter of Holofong, a bridge between two worlds, a leader, a lover, a legend. And her story, a story of courage, sacrifice, and the transformative power of love, would live on forever. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and the faint, distant howl of a wolf. A howl of peace. A howl of belonging. A howl of home. The end.